Some children disappear from your life because of fate. Others disappear because someone made sure you would never find them. The crystal chandeliers scattered warm golden light across the grand ballroom of the Carter Children's Foundation Gala, turning the polished marble floor into a sea of reflections. Conversations drifted through the air. Soft laughter, clinking glasses, the sound of wealth pretending to be effortless. At the center of it all stood Ethan Carter. At 39, the billionaire CEO of Carter Global had become one of the most recognizable faces in America. Business magazines praised his leadership. News networks analyzed his success. Investors trusted him with billions. Yet none of those people knew that every year, on this exact date, Ethan attended this gala for only one reason: to honor the daughter he believed he had lost 10 years ago. A large photograph stood near the stage. It showed a smiling little girl with bright blue eyes and golden curls. Beneath it were engraved words that Ethan had never been able to read without feeling a familiar ache settle into his chest. In loving memory of Emily Carter. Gone too soon. Ethan's gaze lingered there for a moment longer than usual. He adjusted the cuff of his tailored black suit and forced himself back into the role everyone expected him to play. The confident CEO, the philanthropist, the man who had survived tragedy and kept moving forward. "Mr. Carter, the mayor would like a moment of your time," an assistant whispered. Ethan nodded politely. He was about to step toward another group of donors when something unusual caught his attention across the ballroom. Near the entrance stood a young girl. She couldn't have been older than 10. Her dress was simple compared to the designer gowns surrounding her. Her shoes looked slightly worn. Yet that wasn't what made Ethan stop walking. It was the necklace hanging around her neck. His heartbeat stumbled. Just once. Then again. The room seemed to blur around the edges. The necklace was a small silver heart attached to a delicate chain. A design so specific, so familiar, so impossible. Ethan stared. For 10 years he had never seen another one. Because there had only ever been one. He remembered buying it during a family trip to Charleston. Emily had been 6 years old. She had spotted it in a small jewelry store window and refused to leave until he let her try it on. Her smile that afternoon had become one of his favorite memories. The necklace had vanished with her, along with everything else. Ethan took a step forward before he even realized he was moving. The little girl turned toward someone beside her. A woman, mid-20s, blonde hair pulled back simply, a modest navy blue dress. Tired eyes, the kind of tiredness that came from carrying responsibilities no one else could see. She rested a protective hand on the girl's shoulder and quietly guided her farther into the ballroom. Ethan followed with his eyes. His pulse grew louder. No, it couldn't be. There had to be an explanation. Replicas existed. Similar designs existed. Memories played tricks on grieving people. That was all this was. A coincidence. Yet deep inside, a voice he had spent 10 years trying to silence began whispering again. What if it isn't? The gala host stepped onto the stage. Applause filled the room. Ethan barely heard it. His attention remained fixed on the child. She laughed softly at something the woman said. The sound carried across the room. Light. Warm. Familiar in a way he couldn't explain. Then the girl looked directly toward him. For a fraction of a second, their eyes met. Ethan felt the air leave his lungs. Those eyes. The same shade of blue. The same shape. The same curious expression Emily used to have whenever she was trying to solve a mystery. Ethan looked away first. His hands tightened at his sides. This was madness. He was projecting memories onto a stranger. Nothing more. But before he could convince himself of that, he saw the woman begin walking toward him. Through the crowd. Past tables covered in white linen. Past donors and reporters and politicians. Straight toward him. Her expression wasn't nervous. It wasn't excited. It was determined. When she finally stopped in front of him, the noise of the ballroom seemed to disappear entirely. Ethan could hear only the distant pounding of his own heart. The woman reached into her purse and carefully removed something wrapped in a folded handkerchief. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, from the weight of whatever she had carried here tonight. Ethan glanced down. A silver necklace rested in her palm. The necklace. The exact necklace. Every scratch. Every detail. Every memory. For the first time in years, genuine shock crossed Ethan Carter's face. The woman lifted her eyes to meet his. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Mr. Carter, before you say anything, you need to know one thing." The girl standing over there should not exist. For a moment, Ethan could only stare at the necklace resting in the woman's hand. The ballroom lights reflected off the silver surface, illuminating tiny scratches that time had never managed to erase. He knew every one of them. The small mark near the clasp where 6-year-old Emily had dropped it on a hotel balcony. The faint dent on the side of the heart charm after she accidentally knocked it against a playground slide. Memories he had spent years trying to bury suddenly returned with painful clarity. Around them, guests continued talking and laughing, completely unaware that Ethan Carter's carefully controlled world had begun to crack. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. The woman took a slow breath. "My name is Grace Sullivan." Ethan's eyes moved briefly toward the young girl standing near a dessert table. She was examining a display of cupcakes with the innocent concentration only a child could have. "And the girl?" he asked. Grace followed his gaze. Her expression softened immediately. "Her name is Lily." Ethan felt his chest tighten. "Where did you get this necklace?" Grace looked down at the silver heart resting in her palm. "That is a long story." "Then start talking." His voice remained calm, but years of authority made every word feel heavier. Grace nodded. "Not here." Ethan glanced around the crowded ballroom. Reporters stood near the stage. Cameras flashed every few seconds. Investors and politicians moved through the crowd. He hated that she was right. Whatever this was, it could not happen in front of hundreds of people. "Come with me," he said. Minutes later, they sat inside a quiet conference room overlooking the Chicago skyline. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city lights while the distant sounds of the gala faded behind closed doors. Grace sat across from Ethan at a polished oak table. Lily remained outside with one of the event coordinators, happily helping arrange gift bags for children attending the charity event. Ethan had made sure she was comfortable before bringing Grace inside. Now his attention returned to the necklace. "Explain." Grace folded her hands together. 10 years ago, I was 19. I volunteered at St. Margaret's Outreach Center in Milwaukee, mostly helping with food drives and family assistance programs. Ethan listened without interrupting. One night, a woman came to us carrying a little girl. Grace paused. She was terrified. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Who was she?" "I never learned her real name." "What happened?" Grace swallowed carefully. "She told us someone was looking for the child. She kept saying the girl needed to stay hidden, that she could not be found." Ethan frowned. "Hidden from who?" Grace shook her head. "She never said." Silence settled between them. Outside the windows, the city continued moving as if nothing extraordinary was happening. Ethan felt a familiar instinct rising inside him. The instinct that had built a global corporation. Analyze. Verify. Find facts. Yet facts suddenly felt difficult to separate from emotion. "And this woman gave you the child?" Grace nodded. "Not immediately. She disappeared before sunrise." Ethan leaned forward. "Disappeared?" "She left behind only 2 things." Grace carefully reached into her purse. Ethan watched as she removed a worn envelope. The paper looked old, fragile, protected for years. She placed it on the table. "The necklace," she said softly. "And this?" Ethan stared at the envelope. His pulse quickened. Across the front, written in faded blue ink, were 4 words. "To Ethan Carter only." The color drained from his face. He recognized the handwriting instantly, because he had spent countless evenings reading birthday cards, notes, and grocery lists written by the same hand. It belonged to his late wife, Claire. Ethan stared at the envelope as though it might disappear if he blinked. For 10 years, he had imagined countless impossible scenarios. He had dreamed of receiving a sign, a clue, a mistake in some forgotten record that would prove his daughter had somehow survived. Yet now that something tangible sat inches away from him, his hands refused to move. Grace remained silent. She understood this moment did not belong to her. It belonged to a man standing at the edge of a truth he had spent a decade believing was impossible. Finally, Ethan reached forward and carefully lifted the envelope. The paper felt fragile beneath his fingertips. Time had yellowed the edges. The seal had never been broken. His throat tightened. Claire had written this. His wife. The woman he had loved since college. The woman whose absence still lingered in every quiet corner of his life. He turned the envelope over. The handwriting was unmistakable, elegant, familiar, real. For a moment, he could almost hear her voice. He slowly opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. The room fell completely silent. Even the distant sounds of the gala seemed to vanish. Ethan began to read. My dearest Ethan, if you are reading this, then events have unfolded in a way I hoped would never happen. First, I need you to know that I love you. I have always loved you. And no matter what anyone tells you, trust your heart before you trust fear. Ethan stopped breathing. His eyes moved to the next line. If our daughter is not with you, do not believe everything you are told. There are people around us who do not want certain truths to survive. Protect Emily. Find her if you must. But most importantly, never stop believing in her. Ethan lowered the paper. His hands trembled. Across the table, Grace watched the color drain from his face. There is more, she said softly. Ethan continued reading. The remaining paragraphs were shorter, more hurried, as if Claire had been running out of time when she wrote them. There was no explanation, no names, no details, only repeated warnings that someone close could not be trusted. Someone who knew the family, someone who knew their routines, someone who had access. Ethan folded the letter carefully and closed his eyes. His mind was racing. Claire had written this before the tragedy, before everything fell apart. She had been afraid, and somehow he had never known. When did you find this? He asked quietly. The same night the little girl arrived, Grace replied. The woman left the envelope with the necklace. She told us both belonged together. Ethan looked up sharply. And you waited 10 years? Pain crossed Grace's face. I was 19. I had no money, no power, no way to reach a billionaire CEO. By the time I finally gathered enough courage to contact your company, the woman and the child were gone. Ethan frowned. Gone where? Moved between foster placements. Different states. Different records. I spent years trying to find her again. Ethan studied her carefully. Every word sounded sincere. There was no greed in her voice. No demand. No hidden agenda. Only exhaustion. The exhaustion of someone who had carried a burden alone for far too long. How did you find Lily? He asked. Grace smiled faintly. 3 years ago. Her eyes drifted toward the window. I was working night shifts at a community clinic in Indianapolis. A social worker brought in a little girl with a fever. The moment I saw the necklace, I recognized it. Ethan's pulse quickened. You are certain? I never forgot it. Grace nodded. I checked the chain myself. The heart charm was still there. Ethan looked toward the conference room door. Somewhere outside, Lily was laughing with volunteers. The sound floated faintly through the hallway. He found himself listening. Not because of what Grace had told him. Not because of the letter. Because something about that laugh felt familiar. Uncomfortably familiar. Grace reached into her purse once more and removed a small photograph. She slid it across the table. Ethan looked down. The picture showed Lily standing beside a school science project. She could not have been more than 8 years old. Sunlight illuminated her face. Her smile was bright, open, fearless. Ethan's heart stopped. Not because of the necklace. Not because of the eyes. Not even because of the resemblance. It was the smile. It was Claire's smile. The photograph remained on the table long after Ethan stopped looking at it. His eyes had moved away, but his mind had not. Claire's smile. He had spent years protecting that memory because it was one of the few things grief had not managed to steal from him. Yet now he was staring at the same smile on the face of a 10-year-old girl who should have been a stranger. The conference room suddenly felt smaller. The city lights outside seemed distant. Unreal. Ethan rose from his chair and walked toward the window. Below, Chicago glowed beneath the night sky. Traffic flowed through the streets. People hurried home from work. Thousands of ordinary lives continued uninterrupted while his own threatened to change forever. I need facts, he said quietly. Not hope. Not guesses. Facts. Grace nodded. She had expected that response. I know. Ethan turned back toward her. The businessman in him was fighting desperately to regain control. Facts could be measured, verified, trusted. Emotions could not. You said you found Lily 3 years ago. Yes. What happened after that? Grace folded her hands together. I tried to learn everything I could. She had moved through several foster homes over the years. None of them were abusive. Most were decent families doing their best. But she never stayed anywhere permanently. Ethan listened carefully. Why not? Because nobody knew who she really was. The answer landed heavily between them. Grace continued. Her records were incomplete. Birth information was missing. Medical history was inconsistent. Every time someone tried to trace her background, they reached dead ends. Ethan frowned. That alone was unusual. His companies performed background investigations every day. People left trails, documents, records, signatures. Yet Lily seemed to have appeared from nowhere. "Who has legal guardianship now?" he asked. "I do." Ethan looked surprised. Grace offered a small smile. 2 years ago, I officially adopted her." Silence followed. Not uncomfortable silence. Thoughtful silence. Ethan studied the woman sitting across from him. Most people approached billionaires wanting something. Money, influence, opportunity. Grace had spent 10 years protecting a child and had never asked for anything in return. That realization unsettled him more than he expected. A soft knock interrupted the moment. The conference room door opened slightly. One of Ethan's assistants stepped inside. "Mr. Carter, I apologize for interrupting." Ethan nodded. "What is it?" "The board members are asking for you. The keynote presentation begins in 15 minutes. Ethan glanced toward the hallway beyond the door. Somewhere nearby, Lily was still helping volunteers. Still laughing. Completely unaware of the storm forming around her. "Delay it," he said. The assistant blinked. "Sir, 10 minutes. "Of course." The door closed again. Grace looked surprised. Most people would not keep a room full of billionaires waiting. Ethan almost smiled. "Most people are not holding letters from my wife." The words slipped out before he could stop them. Both of them fell silent again. Then a sudden burst of laughter echoed from the hallway. A child's laughter. Bright and carefree. Ethan instinctively turned toward the sound. Through the partially frosted glass wall, he could see a small shadow move past the conference room. Lily. She was carrying a box nearly half her size while two volunteers tried unsuccessfully to help her. Ethan watched as she stubbornly refused assistance. The sight triggered an unexpected memory. Emily at age 7 dragging an oversized suitcase through an airport because she insisted she was old enough to carry it herself. Ethan's chest tightened painfully. The same determination. The same independence. The same refusal to quit. His eyes remained fixed on the hallway long after Lily disappeared from view. Then something caught his attention. One of the volunteers stepped into better lighting. For a brief moment, Lily turned her head. Ethan could see her profile through the glass. His heart stopped. There was a tiny crescent-shaped birthmark just below her left ear. Ethan felt the room tilt. 10 years ago, doctors had noted that exact birthmark in Emily's medical records. Claire used to kiss it every night before bedtime. Slowly, almost afraid to speak the words aloud, Ethan turned back toward Grace. "You never mentioned the birthmark." Grace's expression changed immediately. She knew exactly which one he meant. Ethan's voice dropped to a whisper. "How many people know about that mark?" Grace held his gaze. Her answer came softly. "Only someone who knew her before she disappeared." The words lingered in the air long after Grace spoke them. Ethan looked through the glass wall again, but Lily was no longer there. Only the memory of that small birthmark remained, a detail so insignificant that most people would never notice it. Yet Ethan remembered the day Claire had first pointed it out. Emily had been only a few weeks old. Claire had laughed and called it her little crescent moon. They had taken photographs of it, talked about how it might disappear as she grew older. It never had. Ethan slowly sat back down. For the first time since Grace entered his life that evening, logic and emotion were no longer fighting each other. They were beginning to point in the same direction. "Tell me everything," he said quietly. Grace nodded. "There is something I never told anyone." Ethan waited. Grace glanced toward the closed conference room door before continuing. "The woman who brought the child to the outreach center was sick, exhausted, terrified, but she kept repeating one sentence." Ethan leaned forward. "What sentence?" Grace swallowed. "Do not let the Carter family find her." Silence crashed into the room. Ethan stared at her. "The Carter family?" Grace nodded. "Not you specifically." She always said the Carter family. Ethan's mind immediately began turning through possibilities. His family was not small. There were cousins, business associates, distant relatives, former executives, people connected to the company in ways most outsiders would never understand. Over the years, the Carter name had become almost as large as the corporation itself. "Did she explain why?" he asked. "No." Grace shook her head. "She seemed afraid of someone. But I never learned who." Ethan stood and began pacing slowly. The polished floor reflected the city lights beneath his feet. For 10 years he had believed fate had taken everything from him. Now a far more unsettling possibility was emerging. What if fate had not been responsible at all? What if someone had deliberately hidden the truth? A soft vibration interrupted his thoughts. His phone. Ethan glanced down. The screen displayed a message from his younger brother. Ryan Carter. Running late. Save me a seat at the speech. Ethan stared at the name longer than necessary. Ryan had been one of the few people who remained close after the tragedy. The one who handled family matters while Ethan buried himself in work. The one who constantly encouraged him to move forward. Ethan locked the screen and slipped the phone back into his pocket. Then he stopped walking. There is something else, isn't there? Grace looked surprised. What makes you say that? Because people do not spend 10 years searching for answers and stop at a necklace and a letter. Grace lowered her eyes. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she reached into her purse one more time. Ethan watched carefully. This time she removed a small notebook. Its blue cover was faded, the edges worn from age. I found this with the child, she said softly. I kept it hidden because I did not understand what it meant. Ethan accepted the notebook. The moment he touched it, his pulse accelerated. The first page contained only a date. June 14th. 10 years ago. His stomach tightened. He turned to the next page. The handwriting was Claire's. Not letters. Not messages. Journal entries. Personal thoughts. Daily observations. Memories about Emily. Ethan carefully flipped through several pages. Then he stopped. One sentence had been underlined twice. His breathing slowed. The room seemed to disappear around him. Grace watched silently as he read the words over and over again. If anything happens to me, trust no one who benefits from Emily's disappearance. Ethan's hands tightened around the notebook. Slowly, very slowly, he lifted his eyes toward Grace. Neither of them spoke. Because for the first time that night, the mystery was no longer about whether Lily was connected to his past. The mystery had become something far more dangerous. Someone had wanted Emily gone, and according to Claire's own words, that someone had a reason to gain from it. The notebook felt heavier with every page Ethan turned. Outside the conference room, the charity gala continued as if nothing extraordinary was happening. Applause echoed faintly through the hallway. Music drifted from the ballroom. Yet inside that quiet room, Ethan felt as though he had stepped into a completely different world. A world where the last 10 years of his life could no longer be trusted. He lowered himself into his chair and continued reading. Claire's entries were not dramatic. They were ordinary, beautifully ordinary. Notes about Emily learning to ride a bicycle. Stories about family dinners. Observations about how their daughter always asked too many questions before bedtime. Ethan found himself smiling through the ache in his chest. Then the tone of the journal slowly changed. The later entries became cautious. Shorter, more guarded. One passage caught his attention immediately. Someone keeps asking questions about Emily's trust fund. They pretend it is business. It does not feel like business. Ethan frowned. He remembered the trust fund. Claire's father had established it before his death. A substantial inheritance that would fully transfer to Emily when she became an adult. At the time, Ethan had never thought much about it. The family had more than enough money already. But now, seeing the words on the page, he felt a cold unease settle over him. He turned another page. There was a list of names. Business associates. Attorneys. Family contacts. Most had small notes beside them. Trust. Helpful. Loyal. One name had no note at all. Ryan. Ethan stared at the single word. Nothing else followed it. No explanation. No accusation. Just his brother's name standing alone in the middle of the page. Grace noticed the change in his expression. What is it? She asked softly. Ethan did not answer immediately. He closed the notebook and looked toward the darkened window. Ryan had been 28 when everything happened. Ambitious. Intelligent. Charismatic. The younger brother who always seemed eager to prove himself. Ethan remembered how supportive Ryan had been after the tragedy. How he had helped manage family matters while Ethan struggled simply to survive each day. Yet a question had begun forming in the back of his mind. A question he did not want to ask. Before he could speak, the conference room door opened again. This time it was Lily. The young girl stepped inside carrying a small paper plate with 2 chocolate chip cookies balanced carefully on top. She stopped when she saw the serious expressions on their faces. Am I interrupting? She asked. Ethan immediately shook his head. Not at all. Lily smiled and held out the plate. The volunteers said there were extras. Grace laughed softly. You brought us cookies? Lily shrugged. People think adults do not get hungry, but that is obviously not true. Ethan felt something warm stir inside him. The comment sounded exactly like something Emily would have said. Lily placed the plate on the table and looked at Ethan curiously. Are you really the guy from the magazines? Ethan blinked. I suppose so. You look taller in the pictures. Grace covered her mouth to hide a smile. Ethan laughed for the first time that evening. A genuine laugh. Unexpected and unfamiliar. Lily seemed pleased by the reaction. She climbed into a chair and reached for a cookie. Mom says rich people are just regular people with bigger schedules. Ethan glanced toward Grace. She looked embarrassed. I might have said that once. Lily nodded confidently. More than once. Ethan watched her carefully. Every movement felt strangely familiar. The way she tilted her head while thinking. The way she spoke without filtering her thoughts. Even the way she broke her cookie into perfect halves before eating it. Claire used to do the same thing. Ethan suddenly realized he had been staring. Lily noticed. Do I have frosting on my face? She asked. Ethan quickly looked away. No. Then why are you looking at me like that? The room became quiet. Grace's eyes widened slightly. Ethan searched for an answer that would not frighten her. Before he could find one, Lily reached into the pocket of her cardigan and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Oh, I almost forgot. She handed it to Grace. This fell out of my old memory box last week. Grace unfolded the paper. Her expression instantly changed. Ethan noticed it immediately. What is it? He asked. Grace slowly turned the paper around. It was a faded photograph. The image quality was poor, but one detail was unmistakable. A young Claire Carter stood smiling beside a man whose face had been partially torn away from the picture. And written across the back, in Claire's handwriting, were 5 words that made Ethan's blood run cold. If anything happens, trust him. The photograph sat in the center of the table like a forgotten piece of a puzzle that suddenly mattered more than everything else. Ethan picked it up carefully. The edges were worn. The colors had faded with time. Claire looked young, happy, completely unaware of the years that would follow. Beside her stood a man whose face had been partially torn away from the image. Only a shoulder, part of a suit jacket, and a hand remained visible. Ethan turned the photograph over again. If anything happens, trust him. 5 simple words. Yet they carried more weight than any corporate contract Ethan had ever signed. Lily leaned forward in her chair. Is it important? She asked. Ethan looked at her. For a second, he forgot about the photograph entirely. The resemblance no longer felt like coincidence. Every passing hour made denial more difficult. It might be, he answered gently. Lily nodded as if that explanation was enough. Children often accepted uncertainty better than adults. Grace studied the photograph again. I found that in Lily's memory box after we moved last spring, she said. I assumed it was random family memorabilia from one of her foster placements. Ethan frowned. You never showed it to anyone? There was never a reason to. Grace hesitated. Until tonight. Ethan carefully placed the photograph beside Claire's journal. His mind began connecting details. The necklace, the letter, the journal, the birthmark, the missing records. None of them proved anything individually. Together, however, they painted a picture that was becoming impossible to ignore. Then another thought surfaced. The DNA test. Grace looked up. What? We stopped guessing. Ethan's voice became firm. Decisive. The voice that had built an empire. Tomorrow morning we do a DNA test. Silence followed. Grace nodded slowly. She had expected that moment eventually. Lily looked between them. What is a DNA test? Ethan and Grace exchanged glances. Neither seemed eager to answer. Lily crossed her arms dramatically. That usually means adults are talking about something important and pretending they are not. Despite everything, Ethan almost smiled. It is just a test that helps answer questions. Big questions. Ethan nodded. Very big questions. Lily accepted that answer for the moment. A knock interrupted them. Ethan's assistant appeared again. This time her expression was unusually tense. Mr. Carter, I am sorry, but your brother is here. Ethan straightened immediately. Ryan. Yes, sir. He arrived a few minutes ago and is asking for you. Ethan felt something shift inside him. Throughout the evening, Ryan's name had appeared repeatedly. First in Claire's journal, then in his own thoughts. Now here. The timing felt uncomfortable. Too convenient. Grace noticed the change in his expression. Is something wrong? Ethan shook his head. I'm not sure. He stood and walked toward the door. Before leaving, he paused beside Lily. She was finishing the last piece of her cookie, completely unaware that her existence had become the center of a mystery stretching back 10 years. Ethan found himself staring again, not because he wanted proof anymore, because a strange protective instinct had begun growing inside him. One he could not explain, one he had not felt in a decade. "Thank you for the cookies," he said softly. Lily smiled. "You are welcome." Then she tilted her head. "You know something weird?" Ethan's heartbeat quickened. "What?" "You kind of remind me of someone." Ethan froze. "Who?" Lily shrugged. "Nobody I know." She thought for a second. "More like somebody I forgot." The words landed harder than she could possibly understand. Ethan stared at her. Grace looked away, blinking back emotion. Outside the conference room, the sounds of the gala seemed impossibly distant. Ethan finally stepped into the hallway. At the far end stood Ryan Carter. Tall, polished, confident. His younger brother smiled the moment he saw him. But as Ethan walked closer, something caught his attention. Hanging partially from Ryan's jacket pocket was a silver keychain. Old, scratched, familiar. Ethan's breath stopped. Because attached to that keychain was the missing half of the same photograph, now resting inside the conference room. Ethan could not take his eyes off the keychain. The hallway around him seemed to fade into a blur of lights, voices, and movement. Ryan continued smiling, unaware that something as small as a worn piece of metal had just changed the course of the evening. "There you are," Ryan said warmly. "I was beginning to think you had escaped your own fundraiser." Ethan forced himself to remain calm. Years of negotiating billion-dollar deals had taught him how to hide emotion when necessary. Tonight, that skill became invaluable. "Traffic?" Ethan asked casually. Ryan laughed. "You know Chicago. 20 minutes can become an hour." As Ryan spoke, Ethan's attention remained fixed on the keychain. The torn photograph attached to it matched the missing edge of the picture sitting inside the conference room. It was not similar. It was exact. Same paper, same fading, same tear pattern. Ryan noticed his stare and glanced down. "Oh, this." He lifted the keychain. "Old keepsake." Ethan felt his pulse quicken. "Where did you get it?" Ryan shrugged. "I honestly do not remember. I have had it for years." Years. The answer settled heavily in Ethan's mind. Before he could ask another question, the conference room door opened. Grace stepped into the hallway. Ryan immediately looked toward her, then toward Lily, who appeared a moment later carrying an empty paper plate. For the briefest instant, something changed in Ryan's expression. It happened so quickly that most people would have missed it. Surprise. Genuine surprise. Then it vanished behind a polite smile. Ethan saw it. "Who are your friends?" Ryan asked. Grace extended her hand politely. "Grace Sullivan." Ryan shook it. "Ryan Carter." Then his eyes moved to Lily. The color drained slightly from his face. Not enough for anyone else to notice. Enough for Ethan. Lily smiled brightly. "Hi." Ryan stared for 1 second too long. "Hello." His voice sounded different now. Tighter. More careful. Lily tilted her head. "Have we met before?" Ethan watched his brother closely. Ryan recovered quickly. Too quickly. "I do not think so." Lily seemed satisfied. Children rarely questioned awkward moments. Adults did. Ethan certainly did. The group stood together in uncomfortable silence until Ryan finally cleared his throat. "Actually, Ethan, there is something you should see." Ethan frowned. "What?" Ryan reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a large envelope. The archives department found additional family records during the foundation renovation. Ethan accepted the envelope cautiously. "What kind of records?" "Old legal files. Estate documents. Personal correspondence." Ryan smiled. "I thought you might want them." Ethan opened the envelope. Inside were several folders. One immediately caught his attention. Claire Carter. Private. His breath caught. Slowly, he opened it. The first documents appeared ordinary. Insurance forms. Property records. Medical paperwork. Then he found a sealed envelope tucked between the pages. The handwriting on the front froze him in place. Claire's handwriting. Again. Addressed not to Ethan. To Ryan. The hallway suddenly felt silent. Ryan's smile disappeared. Ethan looked up slowly. "Why does Claire have a letter addressed to you?" Ryan stared at the envelope as if seeing it for the first time. His face became pale. Very pale. I did not know that was in there." Ethan studied him carefully. The answer sounded honest. Or perhaps he wanted it to sound honest. Grace stepped closer. Even she could sense the tension building. Ethan broke the seal. The paper inside was folded neatly. He unfolded it, and began to read. The first line made his stomach drop. Ryan, if you are reading this, then something has gone terribly wrong. Ethan continued reading. Claire described her growing fears, her concerns about people around the family, her uncertainty about whom she could trust. Then he reached the final paragraph. His eyes widened. The world seemed to stop, because Claire had written a name. The name of the one person she believed would protect Emily if she ever disappeared. Ethan slowly lowered the letter. Ryan looked terrified. Grace looked confused. Lily simply looked curious. Ethan's voice barely rose above a whisper. It was not you. Ryan blinked. What? Ethan stared at the name on the page. The answer they had been chasing for 10 years had finally appeared. But it was not the answer anyone expected. Because the person Claire trusted most was not Ryan Carter. It was someone neither of them had considered. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The hallway seemed frozen between one heartbeat and the next. Ethan looked down at the letter again, making certain he had read the name correctly. He had. Claire's final choice had not been Ryan. It had not been a lawyer, a business partner, or a member of the Carter family. The name written on the page was Margaret Sullivan, Grace's mother. Grace covered her mouth in shock. My mother, she whispered. Ethan nodded slowly. Ryan stepped closer. Who was Margaret Sullivan? Grace blinked rapidly. She worked as a nurse. She volunteered at shelters and outreach programs for years. Her voice trembled. She passed away 6 years ago. Ethan lowered the letter. Suddenly, everything began fitting together. The frightened woman who had delivered the child, the outreach center, the necklace, the hidden records, the notebook, the photograph. None of it had been random. Claire had trusted Margaret Sullivan. Somehow, when everything fell apart, that trust had become the thread connecting the past to the present. Grace's eyes filled with tears. The woman who brought Lily to the outreach center. She stopped and swallowed hard. I always thought she looked familiar. Ethan stared at her. Grace reached for the photograph again. It was my mother. The realization settled over all of them. Margaret Sullivan had protected the child exactly as Claire had hoped. She had hidden her, preserved the necklace, saved the letters, left clues for the future. And when she could no longer carry the burden herself, those clues had eventually found their way to Grace. Lily looked around the group with growing confusion. Can somebody please explain what is happening? She asked. Her small voice cut through the emotion in the hallway. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, not as a mystery, not as a possibility, but as a child who deserved answers. The next morning arrived beneath a clear Chicago sky. The DNA results came shortly after 10 o'clock. Ethan sat in a private office overlooking the river. Grace sat beside him. Ryan stood near the window. Lily occupied herself drawing pictures on a legal pad, completely unaware that a single document was about to reshape her entire life. The specialist entered quietly and handed Ethan a folder. Ethan opened it. His eyes moved across the page, then stopped. He read the conclusion once, then twice. His vision blurred. Across from him, Grace already knew the answer before he spoke. Tears filled her eyes. Ethan looked toward Lily. His voice barely worked. 100%. The room became silent. Not shocked silence. Not fearful silence. The kind of silence that appears when a wound finally stops hurting after years of pain. Ethan stood slowly. Lily noticed everyone staring. Is that good or bad? She asked. Nobody answered immediately. Ethan crossed the room and knelt beside her chair. His eyes were filled with tears he no longer tried to hide. It is very good, he said softly. Lily studied his face. Why are you crying? Ethan laughed through the tears. Because I spent 10 years looking in the wrong places. Lily frowned. Looking for what? Ethan reached into his pocket and removed the silver necklace. The one Claire had bought for her daughter all those years ago. He placed it gently in Lily's hands. Looking for you. The little girl stared at him, then at Grace, then back at Ethan. Understanding arrived slowly. Carefully. You mean? Her voice became very small. Ethan nodded. Yes. Tears rolled down Lily's cheeks. You are my dad. Ethan could not speak for a moment. Finally, he managed a single word. Yes. Lily threw her arms around him. Ethan held her tightly, afraid that if he let go she might disappear again. Across the room, Grace cried openly. Ryan wiped away tears of his own. Outside the windows, Chicago continued moving beneath the afternoon sun. But inside that office, a family lost to time had finally found its way home. Later that evening, As they stood together watching the city lights appear one by one, Lily looked up at Ethan and asked the question he would remember for the rest of his life. "If I call you Dad now, will you stay?" Ethan knelt beside her and smiled through tears. "For every tomorrow I missed, and every tomorrow still ahead of us." Then he hugged her again. Because sometimes the miracle is not finding what was lost. Sometimes the miracle is discovering that hope never stopped waiting to be found.